Hi, so today we're going to do something a little different. Instead of seeing me, I'm going to do a screen capture. And first I'm going to take you through the project assignment for the course. And then I'm going to flip over and we're going to look at a PowerPoint that's going to talk about this model of facets of access that I want you to use for your project. And that will also be useful for thinking about some of the material we're talking about this week. All right, so starting with the assignment. So first is just the basic thing is to write a policy recommendation proposing an intervention. That is some kind of change in policy, some kinds of educational intervention. It can be all sorts of different possibilities. By intervention, I mean some kind of action that someone's going to take, designed to increase the accessibility of digital content for some underserved user group. The recommendation should be addressed to a particular information service or provider. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by user group and what I mean by an information service or provider, I'm just going to bop on down here where I give some possibilities. So here's some possible information services or providers. Libraries, archives, some online information source like Wikipedia, a search engine like Google, Yahoo, social media company, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, a blog, Jezebel, Gawker, a technology company such as Apple or Microsoft, a game designer, or a government information source such as a city or state website, U.S. Congress website. And these are just some examples of some possible information services or providers to whom you would be addressing your policy recommendation, your proposal for what they should do to increase accessibility of digital content or digital services to a particular user group. And here's some examples of possible underserved user groups that you could focus on. People defined by a particular ethnic or racial group, children and or youth, immigrants, Native Americans, LGBTQI persons. The I stands for intersex, if you don't know that. Persons with disabilities, and you can focus on something particular here, like a particular disability, like a visual disability or developmental disability or a mental health issue, senior citizens, women, people in other countries, rural populations, poor people, homeless populations, and also you might want to look actually at groups that are at the intersection of these different categories. So children with disabilities, for instance, or you could look at women in other countries and their ability to access content on the internet. So it doesn't have to be just one of these. It could be a group that's defined by two. And these aren't the only ones. If you can think of another underserved user group, and you want to talk about them, that's fine. And also, these aren't the only possible information services or providers. And the idea is it's as if you've been hired by this company to assess kind of the gaps in the accessibility of their services to some user group, and you get to choose that user group. And then you're going to research that and then make a proposal for how they can increase accessibility for that user group. So I'm going to have you kind of do the project in a number of steps. And on this I have this use this word deliverable because that's the word they use in policy research. Deliverable is some concrete thing that you can actually hand to somebody. And typically in this case it's going to be some kind of written document, some kind of document of some sort. So these are the steps in the process, and then I didn't bold that. I will bold that now so it matches. These are the steps in the process, and then after that I talk about the components of the paper, which is different. So this is the steps in the process of doing the research and developing your ideas, and then I talk about what exactly I want you to do in the paper. And I'm posting this. This isn't your only chance to see this. I will post it in the content area. Okay, so first you need to, of course, turn this up a little bit. You need to select a user group and a service. So who are you going to talk about and who are you going to propose your improvement to? And think a little bit, because you need to do some sort of, it can be pretty vague, statement of what you think the access deficiencies might be in terms of this user group. What ways do you think they are getting sufficient access to the service information? And then you just need to write a 1 to 2 sentence statement. Who's the user group? What's the service? What do you think the possible access deficiencies are? You can change your mind. You can change the user group. You can change the service. You can decide, oh, that wasn't really the deficiency. I think it's something else that I hadn't realized. That's fine. Just let me know. Just get my approval to do that. That's totally okay. I just want to get people at least started thinking about this. So that's due on October 7th. All the deadlines for the project are on Mondays, so that it's not interfering with quizzes and other things that are going to be due later in the week. Second thing I want you to do is search for relevant research. So then you're going to go start researching this topic, researching issues related to this particular user group. So for instance, one example was that study I had you guys look at it from the Pew Hispanic Research Center, talking about, okay, here are the degrees to which native-born Hispanic people and non-native-born Hispanic people, their degree of access to information technologies like the internet and cell phones, and how that compares to non-Hispanic populations. So that would be some example of certain kind of research that hopefully you'll be able to find on your particular group, on your particular topic. Or maybe I'll try to give you some suggestions for where to find stuff. The Pew Internet Center for Internet Research, I think it is. But Pew has great stuff, all sorts of really good statistics on things. So I want you to do some research on your service and on the user group, and write and the result of that should be an annotated bibliography of 10 to 20 sources relevant to your project. Each source should be documented using APA citation and should include a 2 to 3 sentence description of the source and its relevance to your project. So that's the annotation part. And that is due October 21st. If you're having trouble finding research relevant to your topic, let me know. Another thing you could do is go to the library and get some help from the reference librarians there. They can probably be of assistance. You don't have to use all those sources in your paper. It may end up that some of those aren't really relevant, and it may be that as you move along, you find some other things that are more relevant to your project. So you're not committed to using all or just these sources that you find. All right, so that's due October 21st. Then I want you to analyze the current state of accessibility provided by your service for your user group using the Facets of Access diagram. And that's what I want to talk about next when we do the PowerPoint. And I'll show you what that would look like. And that's due, and then you kind of write that up for me, and that's due October 28th. Then formulate a proposal and justification for improvement of access to digital content. So at this point, you're going to actually, here's what I think should be done, and here's my justification for it. And I'm going to have you formulate that using a particular, another model, which is called a logic model. And I'll talk later about how to produce a logic model. I'll give you much more information about how to do that. The basic idea is that it kind of creates a framework for saying, okay, what do I think the intervention should be? What's the rationale for that intervention? What resources would be needed? What do I think the outcome of this is going to be? And it helps you kind of organize your thoughts. So that would be due November 11th, would be the completed logic model. And then graduate students only, then at this point, you're going to start having your blog posts due. But those are whenever you've signed up for them, and that's only for grad students, the only ones who have to blog on their project. 5, write a paper that puts together all this information in a coherent argument for your proposed intervention. And again, it's supposed to be written as if you're actually writing a report that would then be given to the head of Google or Mark Zuckerberg or the head of the library or whoever it is that you're focusing on. So that's who your audience is supposed to be. And so you're supposed to make an argument for your intervention using evidence to support your proposal. And then first I'm going to have a due date for rough drafts. So we're going to do the project workshop those first few days of the Thanksgiving break. We don't have any other readings or anything going on then. I'm just going to have everyone turn in their rough drafts, and then we're going to do some kind of peer edit on the rough drafts. So that's due November 25th, and then the final paper is due December 11th. And then I give some more framework for what I want to see in the paper itself. So the components of the paper should be an introduction where you give a quick illustration of the problem, what's the accessibility problem, and maybe an example or story or some statistics, kind of make it vivid, and your thesis statement, which introduces your proposed intervention. So you're actually going to state up front, here's what I'm going to propose. Then you give a description of your user group, what are its features, what's this user group like, and the information service. So we have the important background information about both the user group and the information service you're talking about, what it does, what its role is, who it serves, etc. Then you're going to give a description of the current access deficiency and its causes. So what is the problem here? In what way do people from this user group not have sufficient access to digital content or digital services? And you're going to use your facets of access analysis to do that part. Then you're going to have a reflection on the broader implications or ramifications of this deficiency. So why does this matter? What does it matter that the group has this deficiency of access, that there's certain sorts of information or information services that are not available to this group? Why does that matter? What are the implications of that for this group of people in particular, for society more generally? Then will be your proposal, in more detail your proposal for how the information service can improve accessibility. So above you mentioned that in your thesis, but now you're really going to go into much more detail. And at this point, you're going to be able to use, I don't note that here, but I probably should, use the information you put together in your logic model to actually give the proposal. And note that you might want to discuss more than one intervention. There might be more than one thing you want to do, and that's fine. You may also want to note that, okay, well, people had suggested doing X. There might be other suggested interventions out there, and you might say, here's why I don't think that would work, for instance. All right, and then conclusions finally. The next, also want you to just consider the possible negative effects of your proposal and how they can be mitigated. So looking at, okay, let me see, would there be maybe unintended consequences of the intervention I'm suggesting, and are there things we can do to mitigate those unintended consequences? And then finally, have a conclusion where you sum up the case for the particular intervention you're suggesting, or interventions, and note next steps or further research needed. So where do we go from here, basically? Do we need, in order to implement this, do we need to do some more research on something, or do we, is there some first steps we need to take? So that's pretty much it. And then after that, of course, I have that list that I already showed you guys. So there it is. This is the first time I'm having people do this, so I don't have any examples, unfortunately. And it's really going to be sort of up to you to be somewhat creative. I'm happy to, answer any questions or look at any drafts of anything to be helpful. But I'm really hoping this is a chance for you all to really explore something you're interested in and to get sort of creative with it in coming up with your proposals. All right, so that's the assignment. Now I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the facets of access model that you're going to use in your the steps through your project. So, so basically what I do here in this PowerPoint is I'm going to explain to you this model of information access that I've developed. And as Miller notes, access is poorly defined in the literature. But it's really important, this notion of when someone has access to information or information technologies and when is something accessible is really key, and that comes out in the Miller chapter on the digital divide It's also an issue that arises in the readings that we had for this week about the ways in which certain sorts of racist content, for instance, on the internet can actually hinder people's ability to access the information they need. All right, so basically my claim is that access to information and information technologies is the key issue of social justice in the digital age. So whether or not someone has access to information is this key question of social justice, not just a question of efficiency of a corporation or something. So here's some questions or some considerations that come up if you're thinking about access, why it's important. Can people get access to the information they need, such as important health information? Can people get access to important services, such as online job applications? Can people communicate with important others, e.g. family, government officials, and healthcare professionals, when much of this communication is now taking place online? Do people have access to these technologies for communication, and can they actually use them? Can people engage in online communities in a helpful, useful way for themselves, such as Facebook? And can people engage in online activities they find meaningful and enjoyable, such as gaming? So some of these things are more life and death, like health information, or really crucial, like being able to apply for jobs. And some of them are more about sort of quality of life or other sorts of activities that people engage in, but can be seen as also very important parts of human life. Now, admittedly, we're only going to talk about trying to improve accessibility, and that's not the only important social justice issue related to information and information services. There are other issues related to the ability to control access by other people. It still has to do with access, but it's not trying to improve access for somebody. It's actually having the ability to control others' access to information. So, for instance, that comes up in the issue of privacy. So I'm not claiming that it's always good to have access. It's probably not so good for corporations to have access to all the possible information about individuals, or for the government to have such access. So the access is going to have to be balanced with considerations of privacy. But the thing I want us to focus on is accessibility for underserved user groups to information and information services in the digital realm. Okay, there are a few different analyses of access already out there, and so I wanted to start by introducing this one, and I'm actually going to combine this theory with my model and show you how you can use that to sort of ask questions about accessibility and really explore whether some piece of information is accessible for a person or some information system is accessible for a person. So Burnett, Jagger, and Thompson suggest the three-dimension analysis. They say when you're thinking about access, you need to think about, is this piece of information or information system, is it physically accessible? That is, literally, can the person get to it? So that's both the question of whether it exists, right? Is there a computer in my house? Do I have the physical thing? It also can include my ability to get to it. So it might be that there's a computer upstairs in this office, but if I'm in a wheelchair, it's not physically accessible to me. So there's both of the on the information side and on the side of the person, there's these physical issues about, can I get to this information or this information service or this information technology that I need to access the information services. Second is intellectual access. So it might be that I can get to the computer, but maybe I don't know how to use it. Or I can get to it, I know how to use it, but they've written everything in Chinese, so I can't understand it. It's not comprehensible to me. And finally, Burnett, Jagger, and Thompson add sociocultural factors that can affect access. So this includes things like social norms, cultural beliefs, and values. And we can think of the stuff that Daniels talks about in his articles as issues of sociocultural access. So, what is the effect of racist websites on the internet having on the accessibility to information by people in racial minorities? Is there something there that maybe is limiting their capacity to access the information they want because there's this hate speech out there on the internet? Okay, so I'm going to come back to that, that analysis at the end here. But right now I just want to give a quick definition of access to information. So this is my definition. A person has access to information when he or she has the freedom or opportunity to obtain, make use of, and benefit from that information. So you note it's not just obtaining, but it's actually the ability to use the information and benefit from the information is going into the definition of access. So if you can get to it but you can in no way benefit from it, then I want to say you don't have access. Another really important point about access is it's a relation. So it's a relation between a person and a piece of information, or a person and an information system, or a digital resource. So it's only when this person or group of people, so many of the things that you guys are going to talk about in your projects, so not going to be individual person, but groups of people, it's only when you have to look at both sides of the equation, right? Both the people and the information or the information service, and it's only when both of those sort of fit together properly that you're actually going to have accessibility. And I'm going to give an example of this in a second that might help make it clearer, but I do want to note here there's two lessons you can learn from this. The fact that access is a relation. First, one cannot know whether information is accessible without looking at both components. So simply because there's the computer is there, that doesn't mean the information is necessarily accessible. And just because I know how to use computers, that doesn't mean the information is accessible, right? You need both the computer there and my ability to use it, my understanding, in order to have genuine accessibility. And that means, second important point, that what's accessible for one person or group of people may not be accessible for another, and that's a really key point in you guys' projects, is that often why the information or information service is not accessible to one group is because it was designed with a different group in mind. The designers weren't considering this other group, and they made it accessible to one group of people but not accessible to another group of people. So that can often be what's going on in these cases where people are underserved by some particular information service. So here's an example of an access relation. So suppose you have health information that's only available in English, and you have non-English speakers seeking health information. Then you have a case of inaccessible information. So given that access is a relation, interventions may be effective on the side of the persons or the information or information system, or both. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these cases where someone is underserved by an information service. It might be the information service needs to change. It might also be that something needs to be done to improve the capacity of the information users to be able to use this resource. So there's two things you could do in this case to make the information accessible, right? You could put the health information in the language of these non-English speakers, whatever their language might be, or you could teach the non-English speakers how to speak English. Which intervention makes sense is going to depend on the circumstances, which is going to be more time efficient, be more costly, more effective, what's going to have the best overall consequences. But you always have to look at both sides. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this idea of these facets of access. And basically, there are 5 questions you need to ask if you want to know if some information is accessible. And the first thing might seem sort of odd or obvious, and that is the information or information source available, in the sense that does it even exist? So is the information needed even out there? Or is the information service that's needed? Has anyone even created it yet? And here's an example of information just not even being available. It's been shown that 10% of medical research is on diseases that affect 90% of the world's population. And conversely, 90% of medical research is on diseases that affect 10% of the world's population. Now I'll have you guess which 10%. The wealthy 10%. So the diseases of the poor in the developing world, which is 90% of the world's population, only 10% of medical research goes into studying those diseases. So that means there's just an insufficient amount of information out there on those diseases. So if we really wanted to make information about those diseases accessible to people so they could use it and benefit from it, the best thing we can maybe focus our attention on is how can we fund or do something to make an incentive to get more research in that area. So the first question is the information even out there that's needed? Secondly, is the information or information service findable? So maybe it's there, but can they know it's there? Is it actually something they can find? So for example, it might be that there exists a lot of really good information, government information about Obamacare, but if it's not findable, it's not organized in a way or presented in a way that people can find it, then it's not going to do anyone any good. And keep in mind, because accessibility is a relation, the ability to find the information can be both a factor of the way the information is organized. It can also be a factor of the skills of the people looking for the information. So this might be particularly problematic in the case of senior citizens looking for such information because they don't tend to have the search skills that younger people would have in looking for such information. Third, is the information or information service reachable? So it might be that I can find it, but I can't actually get the information. So there might be barriers such as censorship or a lack of resources. So for example, I read about a case of a doctor in Africa, and he's wanting to help people in his community who have this disease, but he can't get access to the articles on this disease. He knows they're there. He did a search. He can find these articles on this disease, but he can't read them because of intellectual property restrictions. The cost to him of downloading the article is so prohibitive that he can't actually get the information or reach the information. Fourth, is the information or information service comprehensible? That is it communicated in a way that can be understood by those who need it? And the example I gave above was health information only in English, or we've also looked at the fact that many websites are only in English. So it might be that there's this information out there, it's freely available, you could find it, but people who need it can't understand it because it's not in their language. And finally, is the information or information service usable? Is it accurate? Is it from a source that can be trusted? Is the information environment too polluted that people can't trust any of the information they find, and so they can find it, they can understand it, they can get access to it, but it does them no good because they have no idea whether this piece of information is trustworthy or not. Okay, so just kind of put that all together in a little diagram. From the perspective of the user, information is accessible only if it's available, findable, reachable, comprehensible, and usable. From the perspective of the information provider, we can think of these as different parts of what an information provider might be concerned about. They might be concerned about producing information, organizing it, distributing it, communicating it, and ensuring that it has requisite information quality. And that might be a particular piece of information, or it might be the information service as a whole, or the whole system of information. Okay, so I did introduce you guys to the BJT analysis, the Burnett Jaeger Thompson analysis before, and now I want to show how you can combine their analysis with my analysis and come up with a set of questions you can ask yourself about any group of users and any information or information service. So we can ask about any of the facets, and here I give the example of comprehensibility. What are the physical determinants that could make information comprehensible or not? What are the intellectual determinants that could make information comprehensible or not? And what are the sociocultural determinants that could make information comprehensible or not? And you can look at this for all of them in terms of production, in terms of findability, reachability. I'm just using comprehensibility as an example. So when we look at physical determinants, this is going to give us two questions, because we always have to think about the user side and the information service side, or the information side. So if we ask, what are the physical determinants of comprehensibility, it leads us to have two questions. What physical determinants are limiting or enabling comprehensibility on the side of the information system or service? For example, is there this book, but it's so poorly copied that the text is just faint and illegible, right? So that would be something about the information itself that's making it physically impossible to comprehend this material. And then, but you also have to ask what physical determinants are limiting or enabling the comprehensibility on the side of the person who needs the information. So, for example, you might have someone who has a visual disability, and even though the information itself is perfectly legible, they're not able to read it because of a physical limitation. Secondly, we can ask, what are the intellectual determinants of comprehensibility? And that again leads to two questions. On the side of the information service, what intellectual determinants are limiting or enabling the comprehensibility on that side? For example, is the material written only for subject experts? So it might be that in creating this information resource, they wrote it in a way that only experts can understand it, and so anyone else is not going to be able to have access to it. So there's a problem on the side of the information itself. And then you can ask on the other side, what intellectual determinants are limiting or enabling the comprehensibility on the side of persons who need the information? For example, do the people trying to get this information have a literacy deficiency in this particular area? And then finally, there's the sociocultural determinants. So on the side of the service, you might ask, is there material written in a way that's culturally relevant? So is this material written in a way that I could comprehend given my cultural background? There can also be sociocultural determinants limiting comprehensibility on the side of the person. For example, the person might be lacking in the cultural competence needed to understand the information about other cultures. So maybe I am so prejudiced against certain groups, or I'm so unaware of the variety of different kind of cultural experiences that I can't really even comprehend this information about this other group, this other culture. It seems a bit extreme, probably not the most common case, but I was trying to come up with an example for each one. This might show that when you do for the project, it might be that in some cases the answer is just like none. You don't always have to come up with an answer. It might be that for some of these questions there just are no sociocultural limitations on the side of the user. That in this case that's just not applicable, and that's fine. So how I want you to use this model for your project is I want you to use it to analyze the current state of accessibility for your user group. So using the facets of access, availability, findability, reachability, comprehensibility, and usability, and the BJT analysis, which lets you look at, okay, what are the intellectual factors, what are the physical factors, what are the intellectual factors, and what are the sociocultural factors. Look at each facet from both the side of the information or information system and the side of the user. This should give you 6 questions for each facet, just like I had for comprehensibility. So you could just take each of those questions and just insert, availability, or insert findability for each one. And that should give you 30 questions in all. So what I want you to do for the facets is to basically go through and try to answer all those questions. And it can be, pretty loose form, brainstormy. That's totally fine. And like I said, it might be for some you just say none. There aren't any. And my hope is that that will give you a really full picture of the extent to which people are able to access this information service and get the resources from it that they need, and the extent that they aren't, and also looking at where might the interventions need to happen. Where on the side of the service, where on the side of the person, and at what point, at the point of finding it, at the point of being able to use it. So I'm hoping that this will kind of help you in that way. So if ultimately, though, this is a new model I'm proposing, and I'm hoping it will be useful. But if you find gaps, like, oh, there's this other sense of accessibility it's not capturing, I'd love to hear about that, because I want to sort of use you guys as a guinea pig a little bit to see how useful this way of thinking about things is. All right, so that's that for this time. And I hope that was helpful. And any questions you have, I'll put up a designated area for questions about the project. And that's it for this week. And I will be seeing you all online. Oh, and also reminder, the paper where I proposed this model is available in D2L. It's an optional reading, but you might want to look at it because it would give you more examples and it might help flesh out the ideas here. And I'll also put the PowerPoint up so you can look at the PowerPoint separately from looking at this recording. All right. Have a good day or evening.